Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Dave Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.
And welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Thank you so much for checking out another Depeche Mode podcast here with My Nerd World. As always, if you want to email me, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Like it's been since the end of the Memento Mori tour, there's nothing new in terms of news to report. And I also want to give a bit of an update on the podcast itself. Working on some future interviews, as I've mentioned before. But I am going to be taking a few weeks off. I'm heading out on vacation later next week and for all of the 4th of July week here in the United States. And I'll be back home right around July 8th. And that's when I'll return with the podcast later on that week of July 8th. So take a couple of weeks off for the podcast. Now, if anything happens to drop, any news relating to the release of the Memento Mori tour, the physical release, or those mysterious 4 unreleased tracks, I'll certainly pop on and record something at least short. But barring anything happening over the course of the next few weeks, certainly I haven't heard anything as of late. Again, the podcast will be back in about 2 weeks' time after today. So, today's podcast, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole. I have quite a few emails, listener feedback to share. One of them specifically talking about the merchandise of the band, which got me thinking, and I did a little bit of digging. So I want to share with you what I found online. In the middle of doing research based off this email, I came across this article. It goes back to 2017 from Entertainment Weekly, which is interesting again because I was doing the podcast back then. I'm not exactly sure how I missed this. This was an interview, and I assume it must have been around the Spirit era, but it's an interview that Entertainment Weekly did with Dave Gahan. The title of the article is Dave Gahan Reveals Stories Behind Depeche Mode's Biggest Hits. Now, I've edited this down and am sharing from this article a couple of things that you probably weren't aware of. A lot of what was in this article, I'm 99% sure the majority of fans are completely aware of when it comes to the backstories of these songs. And it's always the issue. Oh, I don't say issue, but when you're a fan like we are of Depeche Mode and how devoted we are as fans, I mean, we typically know a lot about this band. Which, when I'm doing the podcast, I try to be aware of that. I try to share things that are fresh and new, things that aren't readily available or aren't talked about a bunch, whether in previous interviews or on a lot of the behind the scenes and the documentaries. This past weekend, I put in the Sounds of the Universe DVD from the expanded box set, and I was watching the documentaries of the making of Sounds of the Universe. And while that album doesn't rank incredibly high on my list of the favorite Depeche Mode albums, the documentaries for that, there's the handheld footage that was a documentary in there, and then there's the one that goes along with the other documentaries that came prior with the remastered editions. I think the title for that one is the typical thing, get the question in the answer, and that references, and I had never seen that before, but it references when they're doing their press interviews, and it seems like none of the guys in the band are ever all that excited to do those press interviews. And one moment in it, Dave's, the interviewer says, "Hey, try to get the question in your answer," and Dave's like, "Oh yeah," and then he starts off saying, "Sounds of the Universe, yeah, title of the new album," and then he gives the explanation as to why they called it that. So I try to find things that are new that maybe you'd never heard of before, and that's what I've done with this 2017 Entertainment Weekly article. So let me run through some of this here. There is some stuff in here that's known, I think, again, to most Depeche Mode fans, but be that as it may, I thought it would be a fun A fun thing to share this week. They start off with talking about Just Can't Get Enough, and I'm pretty sure they go in chronological order here. There's like 5 or 6. I cut out some songs. The background and the backstory on Enjoy the Silence, I think most everybody knows now how that started off as Martin's demo, and then they went and turned it into a dance track and whatnot. So, starting off with Just Can't Get Enough, 1981. Dave says, I was maybe 18, almost 19 years old. The punk thing had just kind of ended, but there was still a few people who were hanging out in the clubs in London. And there's one part of this I had no idea. Who were trying to play music that you could dance to a bit more that wasn't so violent. And Just Can't Get Enough became one of those. We had a group of friends at the time who would go to these different clubs dressed like we were in the video, sort of leathery stuff. Entertainment Weekly asks, how do you feel when the Gap used the song for that ad in the late 1990s? And Dave says, the thing is, the song was written by Vince Clarke, who was in the band for like 5 minutes, went on to be a part of Yaz and Erasure. But that album, Speak and Spell, was very much a Vince Clarke album. And he owns the rights to that song, of course. So it's been in so many commercials and pops up. I remember we went to his publisher at the time, and they sat us all down and said, Vince, you're going to be driving a Rolls Royce when these lot are still on a tandem, pointing to me and Martin and Fletch at the time. And it was probably true, says Dave. I think that song has kept him in cornflakes for many years. It makes sense, but I hadn't really thought about it, but I didn't realize that Vince Clarke owned the rights to that song. So, wow. Yeah, he's probably still getting a pretty penny for that. People Are People, 1984. Dave says, this was the first song of ours that made a dent really into popular music, popular radio. We were using all these tape loops to create rhythms, and the technology was quite advanced, but it wasn't anything like it is today, the things you can do. We used to go into the studio, and the first thing we'd do is we'd ask where the kitchen was, literally for pots and pans and things that we could throw downstairs and record the rhythms that would make the crashing sound and make them into loops. It's not one of Martin's particular favorites, this one. I don't think we've done it live since the mid-'80s. It's quite literal, very poppy, all major chords, something Martin doesn't like so much these days, he laughs. But the song really propelled us into a new cosmos at that particular time. We supported Elton John at a number of big stadium shows and Rod Stewart, which was bizarre, but the song became a #1 hit in a lot of countries in Europe, and it allowed us to go off and create the music that we wanted to create. We're growing up, and it was all happening in the spotlight. Adding to the list of questions that I would ask the band, having the chance to interview them today. People Are Good, because, again, I really feel like People Are Good is sort of the brother or sister track to People Are People, and it, too, is very direct, quite literal in its presentation. Shares a lot of similarities with that song, on top of asking whether or not it was intentional to include that very I Feel You-esque squelch that takes place in the song. Enjoyed the Silence, 1990. I cut out the part of the backstory of the song. This I thought was interesting, though. I'm sorry. Oh, hold on a second. I got screwed up here. In my edit, all right, give me 2 seconds. All right. In my editing for the podcast, I made an edit and things weren't flowing correctly. So let me back up here. And since I do this show live, you get to hear the mistakes as they happen. So, Enjoy the Silence, 1990. I cut out the bit relating to how the song was created, because most of us know that already. Entertainment Weekly then went on to ask, this was the first big blast from Violator, an album that really turned you into superstars. And Dave says, with 1987's Music for the Masses, we were being pretty arrogant. We weren't actually making music for the masses, but we suddenly were playing to sold-out arenas in Texas and weird places that we thought we'd never sell records. It was like a cult following. documentary filmmaker, Pennebaker, who made our concert film, described it as almost a Grateful Dead experience. People were as rabid about Depeche Mode as fans of the Dead were about the Dead. We spoke to people that felt a little different. The ones with way too much eyeliner, the ones in schools that were bullied or had to run home. We were the odd ones, and we embraced that because that's kind of who we were as well growing up. I don't think I've talked about this on the show, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Dovetailing off of what Dave's quote from this Entertainment Weekly article, sort of remembering back to that time period, and this is pretty specific to me, just from when I found the band, having discovered or really getting into Depeche Mode when I first heard Shake the Disease and that song striking a chord. I'm fairly certain I'd heard People Are People and certainly Just Can't Get Enough prior, but they were songs that just didn't really connect with me, and it was Shake the Disease, as I've said countless times, that really brought me to the band. It was like the introduction after seeing them in passing for a few years at a very young age. Going to purchase Music for the Masses, or going to purchase, Shake the Disease at the store, and subsequently purchasing Black Celebration as my first full album entry point to the band. Then Music for the Masses being the first release by Depeche that I waited for the store to open outside to go in and grab the cassette, to ride my bicycle home, to lie on my bed in my room, pull out the liner notes, and read the lyrics to every song. Of course, that album, that time period, the tour 101, going to the Rose Bowl, happy anniversary, 36 years this past week of the Rose Bowl show. When Personal Jesus, Enjoy the Silence, and Violator were released, I remember how struck I was by the shift in the imagery. I know I wasn't quite taken aback by the songs themselves. But, and again, I'll speak for me. I don't know what it's like for you, but it's hard for me to disconnect the two, the music and the imagery. A little less so now with the sort of like past 20 years, just because the way that the band has delivered the music and not having as many physical releases, and not following them and touring them like I did before, the imagery doesn't stick to the songs as much as it did back during that time period, especially Music for the Masses through Ultra and moving forward. Still very much there for Sounds of the Universe, but I think as of Playing the Angel, for me personally, the connection between the imagery, the album cover, and the songs themselves begins to sort of fade off as we don't get as much really good, unique Anton work attached to the singles. During this time period, though, especially from Music for the Masses to Enjoy the Silence, and then that big shift when you get to Songs of Faith and Devotion, I remember how simple the imagery was. The black, the font used for the logo, the rose. It made for this package that really just amplified the band for me. Almost as if it immediately dated Music for the Masses. It wasn't like futuristic. You could say it had a more modern feel than the imagery of Music for the Masses. Certainly the maps that were used in some of the imagery on the album and the single covers, the bright red or orange, whatever color you want to call it, bong imagery that was used, the countryside with the speakers that adorned the album as well. You know, there was something about that had I don't want to say nostalgia, but it had a more grounded sort of earthly feel where all the artwork surrounding Violator and the singles just took on a very different sort of modern feel that really separated it out. And for me, it was cool. I guess that's what I'm driving at. I don't even know if I'm making any sense, but this is just sort of the instinctive reaction. I didn't have this even when I was going through it the first time. I just suddenly now I'm taken in by how effective the artwork was and how much of that really changed my perception of the band. And I think a part of that was I was getting older. I'm getting close to adulthood, 17, 18 years old by this point, this period of time, and becoming more aware of myself, becoming more aware of girls, and how cool this band was, and wanting to emulate what they look like. And just, how, especially Dave at that time period. He was in the Violator period. He was the epitome of cool. And then, of course, you get to Songs of Faith and Devotion, and now I'm an adult, and now this band has become almost more adult, which I think for me and a lot of fans, I'm confident in saying this, roughly my age around this time period, we felt like we were more, I felt like, I won't speak for you, I felt like I was more mature. I was like, wow, Songs of Faith and Devotion is it's a much deeper album, and we're talking about, deeper themes, and we've moved away. So you have this music for the masses. I'm getting into this band. It's new. It's different. Violator arrives on the scene, and you have this artwork and this imagery of the band, and a level of pomp and yet somewhat sophistication. It's more glossy, and a little bit of glamour to it. And then you get into Songs of Faith and Devotion, and now we're maturing. And look at Dave has grown his hair out, and he's got a goatee, and the songs are a little bit rougher. They don't have the pop edge to them. So there's your tangent for this podcast. I had no intention of going off on that, and I don't know if any of that landed at all. You let me know. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. Personal Jesus, getting back to this article. Entertainment Weekly says, the story has always been that Martin Gore got the title from Priscilla Presley's memoir. Is that just a legend? And Dave says, I do think that particular phrase was inspired by Martin reading her book, where she talked about Elvis being her own personal Jesus. And I think that struck a chord with him. It's a great line. It's got humor too in it as well. And there's always this weird dark humor within a lot of Depeche Mode songs that people miss. Tongue-in-cheek, but also very British. But it was in that song for sure. Barrel of a Gun, sort of dovetailing off of last week's episode. Dave says, this was a weird time for me. I wasn't feeling particularly confident during the making of Ultra, and I had some rough times during it. In the middle of making it, we stopped completely. I had to go into a treatment place to get taken care of. I also got arrested during the course of that album, busted in Los Angeles, and then I was in real trouble. That was kind of the beginning of the end for me. I was still dabbling in the idea that I could play the game and also continue my life, but the gig was up. But that record is one of my favorites, Barrel of a Gun in particular, because I think Martin was also playing with this imagery as well, sort of pointing the finger at me. When I perform that song now, it really describes the way that I felt at the time. This creature that was barely existing, but somehow still thought he had it going on. Martin was spot on with his lyrics. I mean, I don't even know if the song was written about me or for me or poking at me to say, for F's sake, get your S together. But it worked. I liked it. We didn't go on tour with that album, thank God. I think I would have died. At that point, I was struggling just to sing. I couldn't stand up in front of the microphone for longer than 10 minutes without literally lying on the floor. I was that weak. I had never heard that before, by the way. So I was allowed that time to get it together, and I'm grateful for that. I also moved to New York, and that was very cathartic for me, being part of life again. You can't live in New York without being part of it. I recently stumbled across, and I'm pretty sure I had seen this before, but it's been many, many years. I stumbled across the most professional shot as you're going to get of the 1997 Ultra launch party show at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, which I was blessed to have attended. I've put it on my watch later list on YouTube just because I want to watch that, and I haven't seen it in a long time. And like I said, I think I've seen it before, but if I have, it's probably been, a few decades. Which is weird when you get this old, you can start counting things in the past as in decades. But I was excited to see it. I watched just a few minutes of it, and I was struck by actually how good Dave looked. I mean, he looked very much like he did on the singles tour, since that was kind of on the heels the following year. But obviously, according to that quote there, he was still very, very weak. Side note, I always love the way that the band crafts their concerts. I just think that's always been awesome. I know that's not unlike a lot of different artists, but Depeche Mode being the band that I'd seen the most live, I was reminded of that when it started, that even at those sort of launch shows and the Spirit Tour, the Global Spirit Tour launch shows that they did, where they had all the streams that went out and they had different visuals that they were showing. They always keep with the, just sort of the same style, even for condensed sets, of having the intro music typically based off of something. It's a mix of a song from the album, and the way that the sets flow. I just always appreciated that. You never know quite what you're going to get going into a new Depeche Mode tour, but you do know that it's going to follow a particular template, and that was always refreshing to me. Dream On, 2001. Dave Gahan says, I was getting much healthier, and I was in good shape when we made this album. I was also writing a lot of my own songs, which shortly after this album became Paper Monsters, but it was made very clear to me that they weren't going to become a part of Exciter, and I was okay with that. And that's an interesting thought, too, that I haven't gone to look at the tracks to sort of figure out which ones would fit, but I'm hard-pressed to think of anything on Paper Monsters that could have been included on Exciter. That being said, a retooling, I'm thinking of those songs in their Paper Monsters form, whereas if you take those songs and perhaps give them a more electronic spin, if you had Mark Bell producing a song written by Dave that ended up on Paper Monsters but was created for Exciter, I think that, you could have some songs that potentially fit. Dave goes on to say, Mark Bell, who produced that record, actually died a couple of years ago. He's not with us anymore, unfortunately, but he taught me some interesting things about using my voice because he had been working with Bjork before that. And he brought in a lot of things that she was doing with her voice into the studio. I learned how to whispering sing very quietly and very close to the microphone, to use all the noises in my voice to be able to create this creature, this thing on Dream On, was one of those songs lyrically where it was a character that I was becoming, that I could be without all the misery. I could step into it and step out. And again, I thought that was interesting because I'd never heard him speak about Dream On before like that. And then lastly, he talks about Where's the Revolution? This one is overtly political, says Entertainment Weekly. You're saying to the listener, come on, people, you're letting me down, and calling them patriotic junkies. Dave goes on to say, we live very powerful, privileged lives, and we're very lucky and fortunate, but it doesn't mean we stop caring. These songs were written a while ago, but they were written with the backdrop of all this other stuff going on, and it's impossible not to be affected by the craziness of the world. Yeah, on Shuffle the other day, Where's the Revolution came on, and it was the first time that I actually didn't skip over it. I don't dislike the song, but it's not usually a go-to, and if I'm listening to Depeche Mode currently, it's not one that I really kind of want to sit with, but I was driving in, and I let it roll, and had quite the nice time. All right, let's get to your listener feedback. Again, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. We'll start here. I had this in the content section of the podcast prior to sitting down to get behind the microphone, but then I found that other article, so we'll move this over to the listener feedback. But this comes from George, from very close to Hamburg, who writes this. As always, thank you for the podcast, even if there are times of drought when there are absolutely no news from the British duo. It's always entertaining. Thank you. As you do really make the very most of it. I try. I know I go off on my tangents. I just hope that you guys are able to follow what my line of thinking. It's funny. It's kind of become a, well, not kind of. It's become a thing for me in my weekly radio show. I have a handful of regular guests, more than a handful, actually, that I just kind of rotate, throughout the months and years. And a lot of times, these individuals I have on because they can usually decipher the question that I'm trying to ask, because I have a bad habit of asking rambling questions. It's something that I've always considered when and if I'm given the opportunity to interview Martin or Dave, is to really try to work at keeping the questions as concise as possible, and let them do most of the talking so I can draw out as much information as possible. Something that I also attempted, and I think I failed miserably when I interviewed the guys from Signal recently. Let's see. George goes on to say, this is also because other listeners write in their interesting ideas and the subjects all around DM, like the ideas with the merchandise. Okay? The last time I bought official merchandise, he writes, was during the devotional tour in '93. Back then, I bought loads of shirts and stuff. One was also able to buy stuff that was not available in the merch stalls. There, I bought a jacket, a wool hat, and tour photos by Anton Corbijn. They must be in a box somewhere, in some box in the chaos of my house. I seem to recall seeing the catalog for this, and somebody had sent me this recently. But it was called DM Plus. And there was all this gear that you could purchase. And seeing it recently, I was thinking to myself, man, I wish we had that now. I'd love to get some non-tour official merchandise. That's the thing where I think the band could have made a killing, especially back during these eras. Ultra, Songs of Faith and Devotion, Violator, Music for the Masses. If they had done more merchandise beyond clothing, I know they did some in the past. I'm not saying, I recognize that they did. But, I mean, as fans, we were so clamoring for items that a lot of the really cool stuff, and it's hard because you got to mass produce it and you don't want to waste your money mass producing stuff that people aren't going to buy. But the candles and the different merchandise and items that came out around those items as promotional items, I think they could have done very well. Nowadays, you could probably do a sort of a create-on-demand situation. But I saw that catalog and what George is referring to, and he sent photos along, and I was jealous just because, especially Songs of Faith and Devotion merchandise would be stuff that I would love to get my hands on. I'm sad that I don't have those shirts anymore, that they all basically wore out, like Matt, friend of the show, Matt, had said last week. I mean, you basically wear these shirts until they absolutely disintegrate. I've already had that happen with the Music for the Masses t-shirt that I bought just a couple of years ago. Back then, he goes on to say, I traveled to many concerts all over Europe in my VW Golf, which he had adorned with Music for the Masses album cover and font imagery. I met the guys several times in front of the hotel, sometimes in the hotel bar. Great days back then. On my birthday, 31st of May, they played an open air in Hanover near my hometown, where I met Al in the hotel bar, as his birthday is June 1st. I was able to congratulate his birthday. There, I also met Fletch. He recommended to take weed to open-air concerts as we could enjoy it in the fresh air. I didn't know what to answer back then. My English was pretty poor. It improved in the 4 to 5 years in London and Australia, and I'm getting by now. However, in the 21st century, I started to design my own DM merchandise, beginning with a DM shirt in the writing of the single release of Barrel of a Gun, and he attached pictures of the t-shirts and the hoodie. Next, it was a shirt for Touring the Angel. Next, it was a tour, well, just for the fun of it, with no tour to it. These were ones with the old mute symbol in the design, and I remember drawing that mute symbol on my peachy folders in school. Then the Spirit Tour came up, and I didn't like the album. I did not really have the intention to go to a live show, but then I was invited to the finals to Berlin's Waldenbühne, thanks to Marcus R. and friends, and special greets to Andy D. Keep it up, shake the disease. As for and if I'm pronouncing this wrong, I apologize, the Waldenbühne shows, I made a shirt with the megaphone from the Masses tour on the front and the mute symbol one in the back. Further greets to Shannon and Colleen from Utah, who I met the very first day of the two final shows. Only this year, I made myself 2 shirts, a hoodie and a wool hat, this time inspired by the special merchandise from 93 DM+. I didn't go to the Memento Mori tour, as the prices were ridiculously high. I don't want to support this price politics. I do not want to think about the price of the watch. Here you get milked. In this matter, here is to all the fans. Where's the revolution? Well, I guess love is blindness, as Bono sings. Sorry for the harsh criticism at the end of this letter. This to finish it. Memento Mori was the best since Ultra, which I still like a lot more. Exciter was good, but there were the first tracks that made me wonder. Same with Playing the Angel. Sounds of the Universe and Delta Machine were worse. Spirit was almost unhearable, and I really tried to at least like it. In vain, Going Backwards and Cover Me were the only good ones. Sorry, just my opinion. I do not want to get much into Memento Mori now. Maybe another time. Also, maybe more about the long players with Alan and my favorites. Okay, all the best to you and the listeners of this pod. Be careful out there. Again, George from very close to Hamburg. So I'm curious, was the be careful out there from Knights of Red? You be careful out there. You be careful out there. You ain't going to get far. I've been wiping out a bit on Nitzer Eb as of late. Now, I say Nitzer. Do you say Nitzer? I say Nitzer. I think the band says Nitzer, if I'm not mistaken. Quick comment on Spirit. I was just reminded of this. My most enjoyable listen to Spirit, apart from the first listen, because regardless of how you feel about the album, the first listen is always pretty awesome. Hearing new Depeche Mode music for the first time. When I arrived in Denver to go with the show, with friend of the show, Matt, getting off the plane, putting Depeche Mode on, and for whatever reason, it started with Spirit. And I listened to that album from start to finish, from leaving the airport all the way to getting the rental car and driving into Denver to the hotel, and completed the entire album. For whatever reason, my mind was open. I put aside any preconceived feelings I had about that record. I just let it wash over me, and it was one of the most enjoyable experiences I ever had listening to that album. Now, inspired by the previous email, I was curious. I went to eBay. I haven't been to eBay in forever. I went to eBay, I typed in Depeche Mode, and I filtered with highest priced item first. Curious to see if there was anything unique on eBay being sold and how much items were being sold for. Suffice it to say, I didn't find anything really interesting. I did find the collection of items available, especially the most expensive ones, to be interesting, while not finding anything particularly interesting that stuck out, except for one item that I thought was cool. So I just grabbed a few here. The majority of what's available in the highest priced items on eBay come down to things that are signed. So the top item was $16,000 for a Depeche Mode signed drum head used on stage at the O2 World Forum Live in Berlin in 2013. Which got me thinking, and this is for a friend of the show, Rob Rom, whom I hope to see in a few weeks. We got to talk about that, my friend. But I would be curious what the old keyboards would end up going for, because I get the feeling that fans would pay a pretty penny to see an actual on-stage used keyboard. And I certainly would want that, even if it wasn't signed, more than I would a signed drum head. So that was $16,000. We have a Depeche Mode 101 signed vinyl JSA authenticated for $7,899. I just really get the feeling these things are going to never sell. This one I thought was just weird. A 1993 Songs of Faith and Devotion vintage t-shirt, extra large, brand new, for $3,139.19. Look, it's a cool shirt. I had the shirt. It's not an album cover picture. It's a official Anton Corbijn picture. It's in the liner notes. But, I mean, even brand new, I could see maybe a couple $100. Maybe? Like in the package. This was not in the package. It's on a hanger in the photo. Now, it may be brand new, but it's still hanging on a hanger in the photo. If it was like in the package, maybe, but let's see. What else did I grab? There were a lot of Martin Gore signed autographed guitars, which, and some of these are authenticated. So there was quite a few autographed guitars, and I'm figuring these are just guitars that Martin signed, or the plaques on the guitars. I don't know what you call them, the plates. were signed by Martin, and then they were affixed to 2 other guitars. This one here was selling for $3,000, $2,999.99. This was the one item that I don't think I'd ever seen before. Still too much, but I thought it was cool. It was a digital promotional watch from the 86 to 98 singles release. Now, they want $1,150 for it. I wouldn't pay that for it. It is a digital watch. But it was just unique. It almost has like an oval. You know what it looks like? I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like a metal silver, really old Tamagotchi. Like that shape with the digital readout on it. But the band was metal and nice. I just had never seen that before. I'll have to go into the Monument book to see if they have that in there in the section for the singles. I don't remember ever seeing that watch. That would be something, I don't know. I mean, maybe I pay like $50 for it, if that, because I just like watches. I don't wear one anymore, unfortunately, but I'm certainly not going to pay for that Hublot one. They were those watches, those Spirit of Big Bang watches. Those ones were dominating the eBay page. I just didn't bring them up and put them on my list. I would love to hear from you on that regard as well. Just merchandise, expensive merchandise, anything cool that you own. That would be fun to talk about on a upcoming show. Getting back to more of your emails, Carrie Adams writes, and a couple of these are from previous podcasts, not last week's. This one is in regard to AI. AI should be doing the grunt work so people will have time to make art, not the other way around. It's an interesting comment, Carrie. Thank you. Let's see. Jade Dixon commenting on the Future episode and the album sales for Memento Mori. Low album sales for Memento Mori in the U.S.? ? Well, when I searched Amazon for a pre-order, all I found was vinyl, and I don't have a turntable. Eventually, I did find the CD I could order. Yeah, I mean, I got 2 versions of Memento Mori. I was bummed. I think a lot of us were. The deluxe edition wasn't very deluxe. Not like we've seen in the past, and certainly not like we saw with Spirit. I bought the regular Digipack standard album from a Barnes & Noble locally, which was fun. I mean, that's an experience that I'll remember. I always remember going out and purchasing in-store. I think that's fun, seeing Depeche Mode out in the wild. It was a little disappointing going to a Barnes & Noble, not a real record store. I ordered the deluxe edition online, so those are the 2 physical releases that I have. But yeah, I think the low album sales in the U.S. just happens to be a byproduct of the fact that most people stream now. Adam Barker writes this: I love Alan and what he did for Depeche Mode, but who's to say had he stayed with Ultra that it would have been 100% better? It could have been a pig of an album, and that's the thing we don't know. In actual fact, the Exciter album wanted a light acoustic guitar feel, and that's not what Alan is good at. So the conflicts could come for sure. Every band has peaked. DM have been blessed to have peaked, to have had a few peaks. So even if Alan had stayed, the drop-off would still come and have happened. He left the band in 94, and in 2024, 30 years later, they're bigger than ever. They made a brilliant album and had the biggest tour. That can't happen if you're a rubbish band post-Alan. I know many fans have become fans due to post-Alan albums. I'd love to see Alan join up again, but hey, let's give the others a bit of credit for what they've done, as it's amazing. In my opinion, I'm not into Dave's solo stuff. I find it a bit too bluesy, and that's the side of DM I don't like. A couple of tracks I like. In fact, there's not much of Martin and Alan's solo stuff that I think is brilliant. The magic was or is the collective of those elements working together. The Humanist track, I'm not taken with it. Probably not going to listen to it again. Regarding Memento Mori, yes, it is a brilliant album. The best since Songs of Faith and Devotion, in my opinion. Yeah, and I echo a lot of those sentiments. Thank you for that. Friend of the show, an AI Depeche Mode music creator, Andrea Fryer writes this: You chose a fantastic topic to discuss in this episode. It's so true, isn't it? that nothing else quite creates a true Depeche Mode experience other than the band members themselves when they come together. Even though other members have had a huge impact and contribution, I lost my place. It really is Gore and Gahan that are the very soul of this band. Listening to you made me realize that it's been years since I listened to Gahan's solo work, which I do love, by the way. But it's only Depeche Mode that I faithfully come back to again and again. It's just pure magic, and nothing can replace it. On a different note, I was utterly flattered to hear that you've enjoyed the AI songs I made enough to actually consider making a playlist of them. As you might have noticed, each song has a different percentage of Gahan's voice. I can't know for certain, but my guess is that AI generates the voices by combining several famous singers it is trained upon from the desired genre in varying degrees to create a unique voice that is never 100% of any one particular singer. In the songs where Gahan's voice is almost pure, it just happened to generate a very high percentage of his voice, where in others, you can only hear a lingering resemblance to Gahan. I absolutely noticed that. I could imagine that this alone would kind of ruin listening to the playlist in hopes of a Depeche Mode type experience, since the voices sound kind of different. And, of course, all the songs fall short of achieving true Depeche Mode quality in so many other ways as well. The beauty of these types of songs is much more about A, marveling at the technology itself, and B, getting into the brain of a fellow Depeche Mode fan. Whilst people creating these songs may not be able to play synths or compose a song, they know what they like when they hear it, and the end result will be based on that personal taste. I've been listening to many different creators making Depeche Mode-inspired AI songs on YouTube and SoundCloud, and you can really hear each creator has his own unique take on DM. At the end of the day, the creation of an AI song is all about building up a song based on personal choices. Which clips to accept, which to reject, which songs to regenerate, which to leave alone. And while my taste is based on the dark and moody melodies of Depeche Mode's music, some other creators might hone in on the noisier, harsher stuff, whilst others go for poppy, danceable side of DM's early work. It's really fascinating to hear all of the differences. Andrea, it's funny because I actually, when I made the playlist, I specifically went and chose the songs that had the closest to Dave's pure voice. I pushed away those ones that you can only hear, as you mentioned, sort of glimpses of Dave's voice, and really made a playlist that was only the ones that we that you could tell that it really sounded like Dave. So thank you for the feedback. MKR writes, for me, Alan is absolutely at the core of any real Depeche Mode music. That went away in 1994 or whatever, and everything since in 1994, and everything since misses the target, despite sounding close. A few songs definitely hit the mark. It's no good, some playing the Angel stuff. But for the most part, the albums don't come close. And the live shows, they're basically a Depeche Mode cover band now. I don't know you could do that. It's really a shame. Alan was the ingredient that put it all together. Thank you for the feedback. I disagree. It is Depeche Mode. It's still the guys. I don't know how they can be a cover band with Dave still singing. Be that as it may, we're all entitled to our opinion, and it's subjective, and I appreciate very much you writing in. Let's see. B-Time-C writes, ugh. The AI music talk is pretty gross and depressing. This tech, and the people making songs with it, is just the antithesis of what a music lover or DM fan values. It's the complete undoing of the art that humans make. Again, I'll, kind of repeat what I just said. I disagree. I think it's cool what people are doing. As long as there's an understanding of what it is that you're creating, there's still a love and affection for the actual authentic music, and the desire to create something that replicates it, in my opinion, is coming from that. It's almost, I won't say completely, but it's almost akin to taking a piece of Anton Corbijn art and then creating your own art with it. You still understand it's just a replica of what it was, and it's not as good as what Anton created, right? You're just inspired by it. So I certainly don't take that harsh of a view. Gaz101 says, Unsound Methods album's solo album would have been ace with Dave singing. Interesting. Let's see. Also, I have an email here, and my apology. I think this came from Jason. I got my last few here are from friend of the show, Jason. This might have been, but it might have been from somebody else, and I forgot to attach the name. So if so, I apologize. I would love to hear another Counterfeit album. Also, I know he sings songs live that he didn't sing on DM albums, but maybe redo some DM songs with his vocals on them instead of Dave's voice. Just a thought. Maybe even redo whole songs as well. And we'll wrap up, as I mentioned, with Jason, who writes, I finally caught up with the last few episodes. Are you aware of this fan-made documentary? I've not watched it myself, but I've had a quick look at the first minute, and it looks well shot. It's called Taking a Ride with My Best Friend. It's an awesome minibus. Not sure how well YouTube handles the translation from English to German, and if anything gets lost in the narrative. Yeah, I tried watching it, but I didn't have the translation on, so I kind of pitched off. I'll revisit it and see if I can do that since the speaking is in German. Jason goes on to say, Spooky, you were talking about Ultra and Barrel of a Gun. I was watching the video for Ghosts Again a few weeks ago, and Barrel of a Gun a couple of days later. It got me wondering if the scene where Dave crawling around in the graveyard in Ghosts Again was a nod to the opening scenes of the Barrel of a Gun video, perhaps where Dave was portraying crawling to death in Barrel of a Gun. And that scene in Ghosts Again is noting that this is what could have been if Dave hadn't gotten clean. If that is the case, it certainly makes that part of the video less cringy. Although nothing can be as cringy as when that ghost appears. It reminds me of Scooby-Doo. It doesn't bother me that much. It felt out of place and weird. Dave crawling around didn't bother me. If anything was going to bother me, it's the ghost, but it didn't even bother me that much. By the way, is it just me, or I'm sure this isn't just me. The buildings in the background, right, they're meant to be like Ghostface. They're meant to be like ghost faces, right? It's certainly what it seems like. As for the Ultra album, from memory, after all, it was 27 years ago, I think Martin said the intention was to go into the studio and see how the sessions went. Yes, with the intention to record an EP. Yep. But it may have also been the case that they could come away with nothing from the sessions. My take from those sessions at the time was based on what Martin possibly said in other interviews. It was a case of going into the studio and seeing what or even who could make it out the other side. Would Dave make it? Would the band even make it? Fortunately, we got both, the band and an album at the end of the day. Regarding the question posed about release apparel memorabilia, like Matt, straight away, I thought about the Music for the Masses tour t-shirt. I still have mine, but the print warped ages ago, so it's not been worn for many years. I think it was a shame and missed opportunity they did a version recently, but chose to replace the wording with Never Let Me Down Again. Completely agree. But in answer to your question posed, release an album of all the remixes released as white label promos over the years. Apparel, I'm torn between the Music for the Masses tour t-shirt or the DM Plus embossed sweatshirt from the Devotional Tour. Memorabilia, this is a tough one. It will probably have to be one of their keyboards, either the Emax 2, mine is starting to show its age, or an Emulator 2 or Prophet 2000, with all their album and tour sound banks. Failing that, one of the keyboard stands from Black Celebration Tour. Here's a question. Would it be the correct etiquette to now ask for Dave or Martin to sign something as a band that predates Memento Mori, knowing it would be missing Fletch and even Alan's signatures to, and therefore be incomplete? I don't think so. They were still a part of the creation of those albums, and the fact that they signed albums that Alan was no longer, a part of the band makes me believe that there wouldn't be an issue. So for me personally, in terms of etiquette, I don't think there would be anything wrong with that. Certainly, it doesn't seem to be the case when you go on eBay and look for all the signed items that are available there that have Dave and Martin's signature. All right, guys. That was a much longer podcast, as always, than I expected it to be. So, a nice, good, chunky one to hold you over for the next couple of weeks. So, have yourself a fantastic summer if you're stateside, 4th of July. I'll be back here after July 8th. I don't know what is it, 10th or 11th or something like that. As always, if you like science fiction, you obviously love Depeche Mode. Check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. Inspired in part by Depeche Mode. It is set in the future where air and space flight culture has replaced car culture. Life in the so-called space age. The world we live in life in general. The lead character in the story is a massive Depeche Mode fan at a time when the music of the 80s through the 2000s is nostalgic and popular among the characters of the story, and they feature references to Depeche Mode, both direct and indirect, while telling an exciting science fiction space opera saga. As Earth faces its end, follow pilots Tats, Katha, and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future. If you like your science fiction to have a little bit of Depeche Mode, but also to be epic with some romance filled with action and really cool technology, EMBARK is perfect for you. EMBARK. Written for adults, but great for ages 11 plus. Pick up EMBARK Book 1 today. It's available free on Kindle Unlimited, Amazon.com, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. Just search for EMBARK and Jon, Jon Justice. Have yourself a good couple of weeks. I'll talk to you after my summer vacation. And I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. God bless. Bye.
Hello, this is Martin Gore from Depeche Mode.
Hi, this is Gahan from Depeche Mode, and you are listening to
My Nerd World.